I'll be reading the scripture from John 1 through 11. I am the true vine, and my Father is a vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I've spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away and as a branch and dries up, and they gather them and cast them in the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. Just as my Father has loved me, I also loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commands, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be made full.
Good morning. Once again, we appreciate your presence here with us today. It's good to see some familiar faces in the crowd, some old friends, and appreciate that you've been able to be here this weekend with us. We've been studying the topic of God's love over the last couple of weeks, few months, I guess, and we continue in that study today. And some of what we'll talk about today kind of has an eye towards some upcoming topics that we'll get into the next quarter as we talk about our love for God. It's kind of hard to talk just about God's love for us and never mention anything about our love for God all in one quarter, and then next quarter to think that we can just talk about our love for God and not ever address his love for us in that conversation. So there will be from time to time some overlap and some coinciding with one another, if you will. So some of what I'll touch on today will just be a little bit of setup for maybe where we'll go in the next quarter, but that's okay. By way of introduction this morning, it just got my mind turning as I read this passage and as we talked and as I was thinking about abiding in God's love and what that really means and how we can express that, or how we could understand what it means to abide in God's love. It got me thinking about what is the purest way to express love, or what is the purest expression of love that we can come up with, or that we can think about. And if you let yourself, as I tried to this week, to just let your mind kind of ponder on that topic and think about those things and really plumb the depths of that question, I think you can start to come up with some very significant answers to that. And some of those are probably obvious, but maybe some of them less so, or at least the application of the answer maybe less so obvious. But the first thing I thought of was in our relationships with one another, what's the purest way that we can express love? And it made me think of a parent-child relationship, and especially the love of a mother for her child as she nurtures that child within her own body, and then goes through the pain of childbirth, and yet after that childbirth takes place, she can have a smile on her face even in the midst of all that pain, and that's love, and that's an expression of love, to know that even though there was pain involved in that childbirth, that there is love that exists there, and then the raising of that child, there's pain involved with that as well, but it always comes back to love. It always comes back to the way that we feel about our children, even when they are going through their own struggles, or even when there is disappointment or hurt there's never a loss of love for that child. And then you turn that around as the parents age, and they maybe begin to be the ones that need some care. And then you see children stepping into that role and caring for aging parents. And if you've seen that happen in your own family, or if you've been that child that's cared for an aging parent, you know that it's founded in love. And it's a return of that love that the parents invested in that child. And for decades, the love that was received by that child then is returned to the parents when they need it most. And so, just those kind of things are what I've just spent some time thinking about this week, and the pure expressions of love that we have to show that love to the people in our lives. And it doesn't end there. We can think about a marriage relationship. The marriage vows themselves, until death do us part. And making that pledge that nothing will separate us, that we will be there for one another no matter what, for better or for worse, for sickness and in health, no matter what. And if you've ever worked in a nursing home or had someone close to you that has worked in a nursing home, you know that there's some pure expressions of love that take place amongst those who are elderly and are still in that marriage relationship. When one of them begins to have their mind failing and they forget who they are and they forget who their loved ones are, and yet that devoted spouse still comes to care for them every day. And what a pure expression of love that is. It's beautiful. And it's something that we hold in high esteem and that we hold up as being an example of the type of people that we should be. Then you can even go from there to think about the love that exists between friends. And I always think of David and Jonathan in the Bible and the love that they had for one another, and the way they expressed that love for one another, always building each other up and making sacrifices for one another. And when it was learned that David was going to be the one that was to be king, that his friend Jonathan didn't use that as a weapon against him. But Jonathan, that Jonathan would have supported David as king had Jonathan lived in order to see that take place. And so there are just expressions of love that are just so pure that can exist between friends as well. And as we look at all of these different scenarios, all of these different ways that we can kind of imagine a pure expression of love, in some ways they're all different because the relationships on which they're founded are different. The scenarios are all different. The length of time perhaps is different. I mean, there's just so many differences that we could point out amongst those things. But I think there's one characteristic that stands in there that is the same through all of them. And it's giving. It's giving. That's the purest expression of love that I can think of. It's giving. Giving without expecting anything in return, giving without malice, or without hoping that it rubs salt in a wound, or without hoping that it brings some kind of embarrassment or pain, but giving just because you love somebody. You look at them and you love them, and because you love them, you give. And it's that outpouring of love through giving that to me stands out as that pure expression of love. And so that sort of frames this discussion then this morning as we look at this passage in John 15, and as we look at God's love as a whole. We're going to get into a couple of lessons, or a series of things here, where we talk about what God has given us, and not from the standpoint of us as the receivers, but as from the standpoint of God as the giver. And what is the underlying motive, or the underlying motivation behind the things that God has given us? Well, it's love. He has given us what He's given us because He loves us, and for no other reason. And so when we think of God as a giver, it's that giving that becomes a pure expression of His love for us. And so that kind of gives you a hint of where we're going over the next few weeks, and kind of where the direction of the lessons will be going over the next few weeks as we continue to explore the depths of God's love during this quarter. And as we get into today's lesson look at John chapter 15, there's a couple of points that we want to make about the words that Jesus speaks here. And if you'll remember, John 13 through 17 is Jesus with his disciples in the upper room on the night of his betrayal, before he goes to the garden and before he is actually led off and arrested and crucified. So there's a long section of the book of John that we have amazing detail about those final hours of Jesus' freedom and those final hours of Jesus' life before his crucifixion that we don't have included in the other Gospels, and this is in that section. And so Jesus here in John 15 is speaking to his disciples kind of in that discourse that you can imagine he's trying to pour into them all that he can pour into them before his crucifixion, because he knows how hard it's going to be on them. He knows how difficult the next few hours and days are going to be for them. And so as he is trying to build them up and lift them up and encourage them and prepare them for what is about to happen, he has this discourse here, or at least this is part of the discourse that he has with them here in John chapter 15. So he gives them this illustration of the vine and the branches. And I want us to notice this morning that a vine dresser is more than a farmer, and a grapevine is more than a crop. And this morning as I was making the slides, I typed that and I thought, I don't mean to insult farmers. That's not my point, guys, over here. So I love farmers. You know I love farmers, and there's farmers in my family and all that. So this is not a shot at farmers. This is just to make a distinction between the role of a vine dresser and the role of a farmer. And we'll draw out some of those distinctions here. So you can talk to a farmer about his crops, and he knows his crops. He knows what he's planting. He knows when to plant them. He knows by date, by specific days of the month of the year, that of what he's going to be doing on those given dates, because that gives his crops the best chance of fully developing and getting just the right amount of rain and just the right amount of sun and just the right growing time and all of those things. So it's not that a vine dresser knows more than a farmer. A farmer knows his crops. He knows what they need. He knows how to sustain them. He knows how to nurture them. He knows how to get the best out of them so that the harvest can be the absolute best possible harvest. But a vine dresser just has a different relationship with the grapevine than a farmer has with his crop. The vine dresser has a different view in tending his vineyard. While crops like wheat and corn and barley last for a growing season, a grapevine can grow and produce for decades. And so that one grapevine in that one spot in that vineyard, the farmer knows that grapevine. He probably knows when it was planted. He probably knows through the seasons what the production of that one grapevine has been. He probably knows the number of times he's had to prune it, that he's had to trim it, that he's had to fertilize it. He probably knows with excruciating detail all of the things about that one vine. And he's got hundreds or thousands of those vines growing in his vineyard. But he knows that one. A farmer knows his crop, but that field of wheat, the farmer doesn't know those individual stalks of wheat. He doesn't take the time to consider that one individual head of grain because he's got all of those fields full of those, and it's not his purpose. It's not what he needs to do to get the most out of his crops. But the vine dresser, he has that relationship with each individual vine. A crop provides a return in the same year for the farmer, or the next year if it's a winter wheat crop or whatever. But you understand there's a growing season for that crop, and he plants it with view of there being a short time before he is able to harvest that crop and yield its return. But a grapevine has to be nurtured for several years before there's ever the hope of a return. And so even while that grapevine is small and growing, there's a care for that grapevine and a nurturing of that grapevine in view of a future harvest, in view of a time down the road when I'm going to be able to start receiving some benefits from that grapevine. Farmer tends to the entire field to harvest a crop with minimal care, concern for each individual stalk of corn or wheat, but the vine dresser tends each of his grapevines individually. He trains them, he prunes them, he directs them for their growth and for that maximum yield on a year-to-year basis. Our vine dresser has a relationship with his vines. And so when we think about the illustration here that Jesus uses in John 15, where he says, I'm the vine and you are the branches, he's calling us into a relationship with him. It's different than the relationship of a farmer and his crops. It's the relationship of that vine and its branches. There's a connection there, and there's an ongoing connection, and there's a permanent connection. And that relationship becomes the foundation of everything else that happens. And if that relationship is severed, if the branch comes loose from the vine, then the vine suffers and the branch dies. And so that relationship becomes everything. It becomes the most important thing that we can imagine, that we can try to sustain, because without that relationship between the vine and the branch, everything falls apart. And so when we think about abiding in God, it's got to be based upon a relationship with him. And the relationship from his standpoint, from his viewpoint, is one of love, because of what we've been looking at. The passage that we have up here, the other things that we've talked about already through this quarter in talking about God's love, what he's given us, what he's done for us, how he views us, all of those things go into his side of that relationship. That's what his view is. He is the vine and we are those branches, and he provides the nourishment. He provides the things that we need in order to be the people that he wants us to be, or that he calls us to be. It's all based on love. It's all based on relationship. But why then would he do that? Why would he love us that much? Why would he give us that nourishment, that nurturing? Why would he provide for us what we need when he knows there's going to be disappointment there, when he knows that there's going to be opportunities that we have to do the wrong thing, to hurt him in some way? Why does he do that? Well, he wants us to be fruit bearers. He wants us, just like the vine dresser tends to that vine because he wants those branches to bear fruit. God is the vine, and we are those branches, and he provides for us so that we can bear fruit. And the purpose of bearing fruit is to glorify God. Jesus says as much in verse 8. He says, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. And so God does this for his own glorification, for his own reputation, for his own vindication, in that he is a righteous and loving God. So he provides for his people to demonstrate who he is. He provides for his people so that he can demonstrate he is a loving God. If he didn't provide for his people, if he didn't give us a way to grow and to bear fruit, and he didn't give us that, then what kind of God would he be? Well, I don't think we'd be able to read the verse that says God is love if he didn't provide for us. Or at least we wouldn't be able to believe it. And so God provides those things for us to show us who he is. And in our bearing fruit, in our response to what he has given to us and what he has done for us, the bearing of the fruit, the producing of fruit is what glorifies him as being a loving and providing God. The branch honors its vine by returning fruit for the nourishment it has received. And the vine honors the vine dresser by providing fruit in return for his care. We're going to spend all of the next quarter learning about and talking about what the expression of our love for God should look like. So when it comes to what does it mean to bear fruit, we're going to save that for later. But just that idea that is our response to what God has done for us. That is our natural outpouring, our natural response to what he has done. But understand that at the heart of fruit bearing, whatever it is, we should do to honor God and what He has done for us. That's what it means to glorify Him. That's what it means to return to Him in response to what He has done for us. Matthew 5:16 from the Sermon on the Mount, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That's fruit bearing. That's giving back to God in response to what He has done for us. 1 Peter 2 verse 12, it says, keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that they may see your good works and glorify God in the day of visitation. So there again, that it's a response to what God has done for us. The verses just previous to that in 1 Peter chapter 2 talk about that we once were had not received mercy, but now we have received mercy. We once were not children, but now we are children. We are His elect race, His chosen people, His royal priesthood, all of those things. And in response to what He has done for us, our behavior is excellent so that God can be glorified. We glorify God by responding to the love that He has shown us and what He has given us in that love. And then finally, I want us to think about this for just a moment, going back to John 15. The word abide in those first 11 verses, John 15, there's the word abide, I think, is there 10 times. And so if you just read that passage straight through, you can't help but notice that word show up over and over again. Kind of like reading 1 John 4 and seeing the word love over and over and over again. Right? So that word abide has to be kind of central to the understanding of this passage. It has to be something that we need to take away from this passage as Jesus is talking about grapes and vines and branches and all that stuff. It's not really about grapes and vines and branches. It's really about abiding. It's really about living. And specifically, he says at the very end, verse 9, just as the Father has loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in His love. 3 times there at the very end. So we're building up to a climax in this story. And at the very end, what it really turns out that it's all about is abiding in God's love, living in His love. And Jesus says, I want you to understand that I love you the way the Father loves me, and I want you to abide in my love. And just like I abide in my Father's love, just like I live in His love, I want you to live in my love. And then he says something that we latch on to, and he says in verse 10 there, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. But if we make this about commandment keeping, we miss the point. It's not about commandment keeping. It's about abiding in God's love. Now, God in His mercy and His wisdom and in His love for us tells us what we need to do in order to stay connected to His love. And He says, if my love matters to you, if living in my love is what your priority is, then here's how you need to live to stay connected to me in love. But if we make it about the commandments, if we make it about checking a list of things that we've done or not done, and that's what it's about, then we've missed the love that's over here. It's not about the commandments, it's about the love. We need to understand that. We need to focus on the love and understand that the commandments and keeping the commandments and living according to the commandments are an expression of how we respond to the love that God has shown to us and how we return that love to Him. But it's not about the commandments. And we can look at several passages. The one that we'll look at today, and this again gets into some of the things that we'll talk about in the next quarter. But if we'll look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, this demonstrates for us perfectly that it's not about the commandments. It's about the love. 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 3, Paul there writes, if I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I've become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have the gift of prophecy, and I know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. Now, are any of those things that Paul talked about bad things? Is it bad to have faith so strong that you can move a mountain? No, it's really good. I want faith like that. Is it bad to feed the poor? Is it bad to deliver the gospel to those that have never heard it? All those things are good things. But if we do them without love, they are meaningless things. It is the love that matters. It is the love that gives meaning to those things. And so when I say it's not about the commandments, don't misunderstand and say that I think it doesn't matter what we do. That's not what I'm saying at all. But when it comes to keeping the commandments, when it comes to doing the things that God has given us to do, if we don't do those things out of love, they are meaningless. But when we do those things, as we should do them, we do them out of love. We do them because we feel His love for us and we understand His love for us and we want to stay connected to that love that He has for us. And we want to return that love to Him. And so I will willingly live the way that He asked me to live, because that demonstrates that I care about His love and that I want to return that love to Him. That's what Jesus is asking us to do, and that's what Jesus demonstrated to us in His life as He kept His Father's commandments. Not because He was checking off a list, but because He loved His Father and He knew His Father loved Him. And He wanted to return that love by doing what His Father had asked. We need to never lose sight of the love that God has for us. Never make it about commandment keeping, and always make it about glorifying Him by living the way He has asked us to live, so that we can return the love that He has given to us. Our call to action this week is to remind us of the danger of oversimplification. I talked about this just briefly last week, and it's something that will come up, I'm sure, again over the next few weeks, a time or two. When we oversimplify the subject of God's love for us, then we take a story like we find in John 15 and we make it about commandment keeping. We make it about the bearing of fruit, and that becomes the end in itself. As long as I am keeping the commandments, as long as I am bearing that fruit by doing those things, then I can check that list, and that's pretty easy to know if I'm doing the right thing or not. But when we stop and think about it, and we really begin to contemplate God's love for us, and we start to think about how I can express my love for Him and how I can glorify Him to those around me by expressing that love to Him, and not in necessarily in visible or obvious ways, but just in the way in which I live my life. Sometimes that becomes more difficult. Sometimes that becomes harder to quantify, and it becomes harder to understand on a day-to-day basis what that looks like, because as long as I'm checking a list of commandments, I can see if I've done those things or not. But now I have to start talking about matters of the heart, and I have to start talking about whether or not I'm really putting the motivation behind those things that I'm doing, or whether I'm just doing them to check that list. So let's do the hard work. Let's not be lured into a life of oversimplification. Let's be willing to take stock of who we are as God's people, to look at the things that we do on a day-to-day basis and make sure that we're not doing those as a matter of just checking a box, but that we're doing them because God loves us and because we love Him and we want to glorify Him in everything that we do. Let's do the hard work together. If you have any need this morning and you need to make it public, we give you that opportunity right now if you would come while we stand and sing.